understand how that part of atrocity prevention fits into this story. But I want you to talk about this gentleman.
It's a really important question, and it's something that's relevant for all of the kind of countries that the Center for the Prevention of Genocide works on. But I think in this particular case, what really struck me, especially as a lawyer who's worked on these issues for the last decade, was just the absence of a real focus or concerted effort by the international community to try to address the real gaps when it comes to accountability. And I'll tell that kind of maybe in the context of talking a little bit about this man. This is Khalif, and this is a photo that Mackenzie took that I think is really powerful. Just to give you a little bit of a background on Khalif. Khalif had been living for 20 years outside of Iraq, and he returned once he heard what had happened around August 3rd in the area called Sinjar. He returned because he learned that his mother, his first wife, two of his sisters, and other members of his family were all missing. And he had no idea where they were. The family had very little information as to what had happened to them. They were all living in the same kind of village called Kocho. And we spent quite a bit of time speaking with people who had survived events that had transpired in Kocho to try to better understand what had happened and what life under the Islamic State looked like. And that particular village, which was inhabited entirely by Yazidis, was essentially kind of controlled or kind of circled by the Islamic State. And for 12 days, people lived there in that besieged community. At first, they thought that they would be able to live alongside the Islamic State. And I think that really says a lot insofar as these are communities that have been accustomed for decades of living in insecure environments. But it very soon became apparent that the intentions of the Islamic States were potentially not very, very good. They were told that they had to, first they were told that they could live and there would be no problems. Then they were told that they needed to turn over their weapons to the Islamic State. Then they were told that they needed to convert. They were then subsequently told that, okay, they didn't need to convert, but their status was somewhat kind of undecided. It all came to an end kind of 12 days later when everyone was told to convene at a school. And they didn't know why they were being told to gather at the school. Many people actually thought that they were going to be freed. There had been promises made by the Islamic State that perhaps they would be allowed to escape and to go to Mount Sinjar. And by going to Mount Sinjar, they could go over the mountain and kind of seek safety again in Iraqi Kurdistan. But when they got to the school, automatically men and women were separated. The women were taken upstairs and put into 3 different groups: women and children, young women, and elderly women. The men were put in a gym. And what subsequently transpired was that the men were taken in carload by carload and shot. The women were taken as well, and I think Dakil kind of outlined what essentially happened to the women. We don't know what happened to the elderly women, but the young women and children and kind of mothers were taken to one particular place in Tal Afar, where many were then given to fighters as sex slaves. Others were used in different forms of kind of indentured servitude there, and have been kept essentially as slaves. And now these women are dispersed throughout different parts of Iraq and through Syria as well. Today, the community that came from Kocho, we don't know how many people are still alive. We know that of the men, potentially up to 400 people were all killed at that same time. We also know that there are hundreds of women that are still missing. I spoke with one man who, when he left the caravan, left with his small son who looked like he was maybe 6 or 7. His son had just been rescued from Syria. His son had been kidnapped by the Islamic State. His young daughter was still missing. His wife had been taken. And these are the stories that you hear from members of the Yazidi community. And they're stories that echo in every single camp that we went to. So even though perhaps the numbers are not, you know, on the scale, for example, of something that we think of like a Rwandan type of situation, it's affected this particular community in a very, very dramatic way because everyone has lost family members or everyone has family members who are missing. And that was Khalif's story. So for a year, he's been searching for his mother. And when you go outside after the question and answer period, you'll see a video from Khalif where he talks about what it's like to not know where his family is, the desperation, I don't think it's hard to kind of express the psychological trauma that these people are experiencing, that these men in particular experiences, because they do not know where their loved ones are. And we've been talking about protection, we've been talking about international protection, protection by various security forces, but you can imagine just what it feels like to feel as though you could not protect your own family in that particular instance. So it's incredibly distressing for people. But in regards to the accountability side, because that's something that we as an international community can do something around, there are significant gaps that exist. And I mentioned at the beginning, I was so shocked to see how little work has been done in regards to documentation. Again, there's been so much international attention, but when you go there, you know, there has been a very, very kind of minimal effort that's been made at this particular point to document the crimes that have been committed against each of the communities that have been affected, to try to collect forensic evidence, to try to preserve mass graves, to try to identify where there are mass graves, to ensure that there are accurate lists of people who are missing. And the Kurdish regional government has created a committee on mass graves, on genocide. It is very much under-resourced. It needs to be supported. The Iraqi government also has an you know, responsibility and efforts to try to address the accountability gap. Immense support should be given. This is an actual opportunity when we think about what the future of Iraq looks like, when we think about the need to strengthen the rule of law and address impunity on the side of the Iraqi government. This is an area where we can be supporting the Iraqi government in actually trying to document what happened, preserve the evidence, but then crucially prosecuting those who are responsible for these crimes, either prosecuting them within Iraq or internationally at the International Criminal Court, or even here in the United States and elsewhere, because one thing that hasn't been mentioned is some of these crimes have been committed by Canadians, by Americans, by Swedes, by Germans, foreign fighters that have gone to fight and are responsible for killing, enslaving, perpetrating sexual violence against men, women, and children in Iraq. And those are people who can and should be held accountable. There's no reason why the culture of impunity that has lasted for decades in Iraq needs to persist. And the Iraqi government has made very clear their intention to address this accountability gap. I think we collectively should be encouraging them and supporting them in actually doing so.
Thanks. I want to democratize the questioning for
a minute.
Sure.
Going
very
back
quickly, because I want to bring our audience in.
Just
yeah, please.
Going back to culture, everyone, especially in the United States, knew what's happening in culture at that time, in that 12 days. And we know that more than, I said, around 900 people are in culture and under ISIS, and they are facing the threat to be killed or to be kidnapped. And it happens. Men were killed, women were taken, but I will mention one case that we saw her a month or 2 months ago. Her name was Bazi, and some of people here met her. My wife, my daughter, they loved her, and we still talk about her. And some other friends in the audience, I know that they become friends of Bazi. And she was owned by an American ISIS militant. And we heard stories that, I mean, beyond the imaginations. So that's what happened, especially for Cultural Village. Still, I would say around, I don't have the exact number, but maybe 25 to 30 people were able to escape from that village from ISIS.
We have some mic runners on either side of the aisle, so I have a hard time seeing. So why don't you just with the lights? So Dan and Sean, if you can help identify people. We'll take a couple of questions at a time so that we'll give our panelists a kind of a la carte choice here.
My name is Taik Jani. I work for the Education for Peace in Iraq Center. I'm actually from Baghdad. I come from the Mandan community. One issue that I've seen in terms of the international response to protecting minorities in Iraq is there is this long-term plan for these minorities. Like you said, the U.S. couldn't foresee what these minorities might see or might face in Iraq right now, but nothing happened. And until today, the talk is about only like Sunnis versus Shiites or other violence that's happening in Iraq. So can you tell us on what the U.S. is currently doing? How is the U.S. responding to this crisis? And is there this long-term strategy for protecting these groups? Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have one over here?
Hi, thank you so much for being with us this evening. My name is Brittany Vanderhurst and I'm with HIAS. HIAS is a refugee resettlement agency based here in DC, and when we hear of things like refugees or displaced people, we think of sort of the three durable solutions available in terms of either returning home, integrating into the communities that have been hosting them, or being resettled into third countries. And it sounds like returning home may not be an option anytime soon. So in your travels and speaking with the minority groups that have been displaced, is there sort of a preference that's emerging either to stay in the region and try to wait it out and to integrate with where they're living? Or is there a preference for being resettled sort of outside of the region to a third country?
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
I have the mic if I may. Right here.
Oh, sorry. Thanks.
My name is Juliana Taimurazi. I'm with the Iraqi Christian Relief Council, and I'm a fellow at the Philos Project. My question is, for the last 8 years, Iraqi Christian Relief has traveled throughout the country to talk about the atrocities being committed against the Assyrian Christians in Iraq, and now also Syria. There's a very serious apathy that has set in the United States. My question is, how would the panelists encourage us to change potentially a strategy to wake America up? This is something very serious, and we need to wake up the church. In fact, the Jewish community is very much more receptive to this cause than the Christians are today.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have got three excellent questions. One, I heard the development of a new kind of comprehensive plan. I think that actually relates well to the third question we just took about given a decade plus of conflict in Iraq, how do we renew the call for action in Iraq? And then lastly, the question of integration or resettlement, other options in the sort of medium term to returning home. Why don't we let you choose which one you'd like to respond to, and we'll try to cover them all very briefly so we can do another round.
The last question. There is a man sitting behind you, former Congressman Wolf. He's one of the people that I would say working in that issue, and unfortunately he's a former congressman, but now in the Congress there are people working on this issue. And there are 2 or 3 resolutions that I have with me in the last 2-3 weeks being submitted to the committees that deals with how to deal with the ISIS, how to do something to protect those minorities. So the answer is to work with those people in the Congress, in the U.S. government, push them, tell them this what happened. And I would say this America is a country of the institutions, not that it's not a country that a man can decide what to do. The institution has to come together, and it has the legal act in these cases. That's my answer.
Nikhil, can I ask you just on the since I think you can better represent this response in terms of integrating versus resettling, what is the appetite among these communities to remain in safety, yes, but in an area that is not their home over the long term?
There's no solution but to go back. Those people have to go back. It's not 100 or 200 or 1,000 people that you can integrate them in different community or host them in other places or give them asylum or to a country. There are more than 400,000 people.
Yeah.
So there's no way but to liberate the area, to have a protection, international protection, so they will stay alive and they can survive. Otherwise, they won't go back and they will not survive in this environment, especially in the area of northern Mosul from Syria and going to that area is a fire by itself. It's a bomb. I mean, especially for the minorities. Minorities cannot. The issue of the security has been there for years and years. And even in the United States, when we have, I remember it was 2007, 2008 conference with the American, I would say, officials, and where they organize some kind of conferences for the minorities, Christian, Yazidis, Mandais, Shabak. We get together and we all ask for the protection and the security. And that time, the answer was, oh, we can't do that. If we come there, do something for you, then you will be a target because those people will think you are our friends. So to be American friends is not good for you. But it's happening. You say, it is happening. And that happened. And if there will be other groups, other organizations under different names, but with the same ideology that attacking their minorities. Minorities will not be in safe until there is a mechanism for their security by the international community.
Do either of you want to jump in on the other ones?
I can take the one on the long-term strategy. The focus that I'm bringing to this new position that's just been created 6 weeks ago or just been filled 6 weeks ago is threefold, looking at protection, governance, and reform. So for protection, it's protecting people. How do we protect religious minorities where they are, where they fled? And I'd like to recognize the representative of the Kurdistan Regional Government here on the front row and the great work that they've done to accept this huge flow of IDPs into their province and to give them safety. But it's also protecting things. You know, for these ancient religious communities, there are religious sites, churches, mosques, temples, monasteries that have, unbelievable level of meaning to them. And we have to figure out ways to protect that so that once they return, there's something to go back to. The second issue of governance, if there's going to be a future for religious minorities in the Middle East, in this region, around the world, we have to encourage governments to do the first and most fundamental role of governing, which is protect minorities from harm. Mm-hmm. And when people break the law, that ensure that there's accountability. The perpetrators are held to account should they act out violently. Then the third issue is reform. When governments are part of the problem, when they're the persecutor, how do we leverage U.S. influence to get them to right their ways? So that's the approach that I'm bringing, to focus on protection, governance, and reform. And I think if we can find ways to move the needle in all three, we can start to make progress in this very complicated and difficult challenge.
Let's do another round of questions. We had one up front. Here we go, Sean. And we can go over here.
Committee on Conscience, the Holocaust Museum. I agree that return is certainly the ideal solution. But sometimes these situations are very protracted. Sometimes there are some very vulnerable among those who are displaced. And that is where they're often identified, say, by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees or others, as warranting resettlement. And my question has to do with the United States government, whether the United States has any special focus on Yazidis, or particularly Yazidi women and children, because the State Department has tried to increase the number of Syrians that are being brought to the United States. I wonder if there's a similar focus on the Yazidis. And I know there is often a lot of rhetoric coming from the Assistant Secretary's Office for Migration and Refugees, whether about rhetoric about women, whether there's an effort made in the case of the Yazidi women to be brought into the United States. I don't mean all the Yazidi women, but particularly vulnerable and people at risk.
Thanks. We had one over here, and then we'll come up front for one more.
Thank you each of you for speaking on the panel tonight. My name is Kelsey. I just have a twofold question. First of all, with Christians being one of the largest persecuted minority in the Middle East, I'm just wondering why Christians are represented on the panel tonight. And then secondly, in particular, Assyrian Christians, whereas prior to 2003, we had about 1.6 million Assyrian Christians in northern Iraq, and now they're estimated about 300,000. I was just wondering what the future looks like for them, for Assyrian Christians, and also what the government organizations are planning on doing for that particular group.
Thank you. And I think we had one question here. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Would it make sense possibly for Iran to be reformed into multiple countries, more than one country, that are ethnic and religious based?
Okay, so that's quite a range of questions. I'll take the moderator's prerogative and say that I think we really wanted to have a representative of Iraq's Christian community with us here tonight, and simply were not able to logistically make that happen. But I think one of the things that we've endeavored to do, which you will see outside, are the photos of those communities, as well as a description of their plight, and would just put in a little bit of a plug for forthcoming work from our center, with a website that we've created and are creating to put online and make available personal testimonies of all of these communities, so that people can understand in their own words what's been happening to these communities, which will include a tremendous focus on Christians as well as Yazidis and others. So I didn't want to think that we had missed an opportunity there. So to the other questions about have we heard about Yazidis being allowed in greater numbers, or any kind of conversation about whether or not that might be possible? And then the last question on Iraq's future as a unitary state. We've heard that one over the course of history a few times, but why don't we let our panelists decide if they want to touch that one.
On the refugee issue, I will need to find out. I'm not sure of the answer. I do know that we do have a special program on gender-based violence that has working with about 100 Yazidi women who have escaped from the nightmare of their captivity and forced rape. So we are trying to stand up ways to help those women who are in northern Iraq, but I simply don't know about the resettlement program out of Iraq for Yazidi women and children. I'll look into that. On the Assyrian Christians' future, I think it's something, I hope through this position to fight so that they have an Iraq to go back to that they feel comfortable in, that they feel secure and safe and see a future. I have to say I'm very inspired by the recent decision of the Assyrian Church of the East to move the seat of their church from Chicago to Erbil. At a time when people are trying to leave, the church leadership decided this is the time where we're going back. And I think that's a real example of leadership and courage that should inspire all of us to find ways to redouble our efforts to help see that religious diversity and religious minorities have a place in Iraq in the future.
Did you want to add anything?
I would comment on the last thing, that the fate of the Yazidi and Christian and all other minorities, religious minorities, non-Muslim minorities in Mosul is the same. So when you talk about Yazidi, you have to say, understand that we're talking about Christian. When we talk about Christian, Yazidis, and other groups, Shabak or other people in there. So we have the same thing. In regard of the refugee and the U.S., unfortunately, they don't have. A while ago, the American Yazidi Center president is here, Suleiman. We had a meeting at the State Department, and we asked the same question. We tell them, you at the State Department having these programs, why not even a number, 10 or 100 Yazidis? So they come, and unfortunately, they don't have it. There are some specific cases that individuals, as Max mentioned, there are individuals that they may come. But we have cases like the one that we talked, Bazi from Kochun. She is granted American visa, but she cannot come because their relatives are not granted. So her and her brother, who is injured in Kochun too, they get American visa, but she's asking for other her sisters or other people that it was same family, they're not given a visa. So that's the big problem. Unfortunately, the US, we Americans doing nothing for the Yazidis and the Christian Muslims specifically.
Can I offer you one last word, Naomi?
I just wanted to kind of pick up on something that Dakhil had mentioned and just underscore that I think that question about the future is pertinent for all of the religious and ethnic minorities. Something that I think has to be stressed, and Knox mentioned it at the beginning too, was that there are Muslim communities, Muslim minorities that have been targeted in the violence that's been perpetrated by the Islamic State. And I think it's really important because these are often very small communities that people tend to forget about. Shabak, Kakai, even the much larger community of the Turkmen, which is one of the largest communities in Iraq, but that are made up of Sunni and Shia, and where we've seen both communities being targeted, but particularly the Shia aspects of some of these particular groups. And I just think it's really important to underscore, because from the perspective of the Islamic State, all of these communities are vulnerable and merit protection and need to be part of that kind of focus on a long-term strategy, because there aren't necessarily other actors out there that are going to be able to provide them with the physical protection that they need. And it really, for me, kind of came home in a very personal way in one of the camps that I was in when we were interviewing a Shabak man who told me about his uncle who was stopped in a particular town and asked, are you Sunni or Shia? And he said, what does it matter? And he's never heard from his uncle since then. That was the last thing that anyone has ever kind of encountered in terms of seeing the uncle. So just that sheer act of saying it doesn't matter, I'm just a human being. It should not matter if I'm Sunni, Shia, Christian, Yazidi, or anything, is not a permissible way of living one's life in Iraq today under the Islamic State. So when we think about what the future of Iraq has to be, it has to be a future in which you can define your identity as you wish, you can preserve your identity as you wish, and that diversity is something that is celebrated. And I think that's part of what we have to be pushing for in terms of developing that long-term strategy. And you simply can't have a long-term strategy for Iraq today that doesn't embrace an atrocity prevention perspective, that doesn't focus on who's vulnerable, who's targeting them, how do we protect them in an immediate physical sense, and how do we put in place the different things that we need to try to ensure that they're not targeted again in the future, be that holding perpetrators accountable, tackling misunderstandings and the lack of tolerance that exists today, improving education, tackling hate speech, all of those different factors that help, in addition to these kind of underlying long-term grievances that come from sectarianism and poor economic conditions. All of those factors have to be looked at if we're going to talk in a sincere way about protecting minorities in the future and ensuring that Iraq exists as a plural and diverse society in the future.
I think that's a great note to end our conversation on. I want to just first thank our panelists for being here tonight, sharing their stories. Situation remains dire, and I'm grateful for all of your ongoing work and commitment to this issue. I want to invite everyone to join us on our plaza on the 15th Street side of the building, where we're kicking off our Photo Week exhibition. You can come back every night of the week if you like, but we'll be showcasing photos and videos of our recent trip to Iraq, and hopefully shining a light on all of these communities and the situation in Iraq going forward. I've been told to remind everyone to get your coat from Coat Check before you go outside. You'll probably realize you need it once you're outside, but it'll be hard to get back in through security. So thank you all for coming to the Holocaust Memorial Museum tonight, and good evening.